Welcome once again everybody to part 2 of our complete Flutter tutorial. In this tutorial we're going to look at Dart and its different types, the print statements and string formatting. So really quickly before all of that, I want to talk a tiny bit about IDEs and which one you might use. So for myself, you can see I already have Visual Studio Code loaded up. It is my IDE of choice. Essentially your options when programming Flutter is to use Visual Studio Code, Android Studio. I think you can also use IntelliJ. All of these work quite well. You could also use any other IDE, but you won't have all the other features, auto-completion and stuff like that. That's why I would really recommend either Visual Studio Code or Android Studio. For myself, I prefer Visual Studio Code because, at least on my system, it runs better. Android Studio tends to use just way too much RAM, and especially that startup time is abysmal. And I don't like waiting 5 minutes to be able to start coding. I want to just start whenever I'm ready. However, for this specific video, I recommend you guys go to dartpad.dartlang.org. Now, what this website does is it's made by the Dart team so that you can write Dart code and run it right here in the web browser. So you don't need to fiddle around with anything. And now I'm still going to use Visual Studio Code because the website is a tiny bit laggy. But just note that if you do want your programs in Dart, so not Flutter, but in Dart, to run properly from Visual Studio Code, you do need the Dart CLI installed, which I have. But just note it doesn't come automatically with Flutter. It's something you need to install separately. And it's not complicated at all. You can just Google it and I guarantee you'll find it super easy. But yeah, you will need that. Okay, so let us jump right in. The very first thing we need to know about Dart programs is the main function. So I don't know if you guys have done any programming before, but perhaps you know that some programming languages need a main function and others do not. Dart is one of those languages, similar to Java, similar to C, in which you absolutely need a main function. And we're going to do that by just writing void main, open and close parentheses, and open and close curly braces. So this is our main function, and you must write it with exactly like this, main. This is where all of our code will run. So code runs here. This is the starting point of absolutely anything, any program in Dart, including Flutter. If I write something out here, var x equals new var, it's not going to do anything at all. This x, what can I do with it? If I write print x, it's not going to do anything. It's not going to print it because it's not within the main function. In the future, we'll go into more detail into how we structure programs, because right now you might be thinking, oh, it all goes in the main function. I bet your main function is like 1,000,000 lines long. Not really. But we'll go more into that in the future. Okay, so we need to write all of our code right here in the main function. For now, don't worry too much about what this void means, but just be aware that before writing main, you will almost always write void. You might sometimes see int as well, int main, but for Dart code, for Flutter, almost always it's void. And the very first thing we're going to go over is every programmer's first program, and that is hello world. What we're going to do here is simply print, well, hello world. It's necessary for us coders. And this is how we do it in Dart. The statements we use, the function we use to print is simply print, open and close parentheses, and then you can use either double quotes with the string inside, hello world, or we could also use single quotes like this, hello world. There is no difference at all between the single or the double quotes. Both are correct. So the print function, I think it's the same as Python, exactly the same. If you have done any other programming, I know that in C it's printf. In Java, if I'm not, I think it's sys.out. I'm not 100% sure. Don't quote me on that. In Go, it's format.print and so on and so forth. But for us, it's going to be print, open close parenthesis, hello world. And that's fine. One thing you absolutely must remember for Dart code is right here, your semicolon. Semicolons are not optional. I know if you write things like Python, you don't need any. With things like JavaScript, they're optional. You can include them or not. But in Dart, absolutely necessary. If I try to delete this and go to the next line, well, it's not doing it right now, but it should be showing me an error. In fact, if I try to run this by saying Dart, and again, you'll need the Dart CLI installed to be able to run in this way, hello world.dart, and that is the name of the file. I'm getting it from here. I expect, yeah, it gave me an error, expected semicolon after this, print hello world. So by putting the semicolon here, saving it and running it again, now you can see it prints hello world correctly the way it should. Actually, give me a second. I'm going to very quickly restart Visual Studio Code because it should have done that for me automatically. Okay, welcome back. So I'm not sure why Visual Studio Code was not showing me the errors over here last time, but now it is. You can see if I leave out the semicolon, there's a red squiggly line, and if I put my mouse over it, it says expect to find semicolon. So do that and it's all perfectly fine. Again, for you guys, if you're just following along at home, feel free to copy this into Dartpad, paste here, and just hit that run button right here. And you can see there was a bit of a delay. That's why I'm using VS Code. And in the console here, it's going to say hello world. So that is all fine. Very simply, that is how you can print hello world. Okay, so the next thing we need to know for absolutely any programming language is variables. A variable is anything that can hold a value. Dart is strongly typed. What that means is that a string or an int or a double are different, and we actually need to specify this. Well, with Dart it's a tiny bit more confusing, but we'll go into that. So the way we can declare a variable is the simplest way is simply to write var for variable and then give it a name like x equals and then some value. We could give it a number 14, for example, and remember your semicolon. We can also use a string var first name equals Ovidius, that's myself, and anything like this. Now, so first of all, the blue squiggly line is because it's not being used currently. To get rid of this warning, we can just use the variable, but that's fine. As I mentioned, variables in Dart are strongly typed. So even though we're not saying the type of the variable, Dart is smart enough to infer, to realize what the type is because of this, because we're declaring it right afterwards. In fact, if I hover my mouse over first name, you'll notice it says string first name. Similarly, if I hover my mouse over x, you'll notice it says int x. However, although Dart can infer the type, personally I think it's much better to actually say the type outright. The way we would do that would be by int number equals 19 semicolon, string last name equals Mazuru semicolon, like that. Okay, And for our variables, we have several types. First is int, and we could say int num equals 1. An int is a whole number. So that's 1, 2, 3, so on and so forth, 215, up until, I actually don't know the limit, but it's a big number. Yeah. Then we have doubles. Doubles are, we'll write double num. Doubles are numbers which have a fraction, which have a point afterwards. 1.2 is a double. 10 or 12.987 is another double, and so on. Now, one thing to notice is that ints and doubles are not actually the same. If I try to do int num equals 1.2, it's going to give me an error here, and it says a value of type double can't be assigned to a variable of type int, because we declared int num here as an int, but we're trying to use 1.2, which is a double. However, we can do it the other way. We can say double num equals 1, and that's fine. I can use an int in a double, but I cannot use a double in an int. You might be thinking, oh, so why don't I just declare everything as a double and not worry about it? Well, then your numbers aren't going to be optimized. One of the advantages of Flutter is that it works very, very quickly. And one of the reasons it works much quicker than something like JavaScript is right here, our types. So we should try to take advantage of this as much as we can. If you only need an int, use an int. If you only need a double, use a double. Okay, and we do also have one more number type, which is num. The num type, and we'll put num, can hold either an int, is correct, or a double, also correct. Essentially, your num is, it could be either int or double. It doesn't really make too much of a difference. But again, it goes back to what I said earlier. We really should be as specific as we can. So if you know ahead of time if it's an int or a double, use one of those and don't use num. This type is sometimes useful, for example, when working with JSON data. Sometimes if I work with JSON data, if I'm getting numbers from a different website, sometimes it's an int, sometimes it's a double when I pass it. And what I might do is first register it as a num, and then once it's a num, I can convert it to an int or a double. Because if it's a double in the JSON and I try to change it to an int, it can give me an error. If I try to change it into a double, but it's an int, it can give me an error. But by recognizing it as a num first and then changing it, I can get rid of that error. So that's one place where num is going to be very useful. Okay, so those are our number types, and I'll just write this as well. Num equals, we'll put a random number, semicolon. Then we have our strings. String first name equals Ovid, so we went over the strings already. This is just any list of characters. It can be as short or as long as you want. There's no real limit here. Technically, behind the scenes, a string is a list, it's an array, but it's not something we need to worry about. If you do know any C programming or anything like that, it might be useful to know, but otherwise don't worry about that. And then our final type, final primitive, is dynamic. Now, the dynamic type is interesting because it can change types. So I can say dynamic, what do I call it? A variable equals 1, 2, 3. And here you can see 1, 2, 3, of course, is an int. But I can later say variable equals string. And this is correct. It does not give me an error. So notice that when using dynamic, If I hover my mouse over variable, it actually says dynamic variable. What that means is that it can change. This is different than var, new var equals 1, 2, 3. Because when we use var, what I'm saying is, hey Dart, infer the type for me. And if I hover my mouse over new var here, it says it's an int. So if I try to say new var equals string, this one is going to give me an error because new var behind the scenes is an int, even though I haven't specifically said it, as opposed to the dynamic where it can change. And again, you might see this and think to yourself, oh wow, so I should just use dynamic for everything and not worry about it. But that's going to come at significant performance reduction, so I would not advise doing that. Whenever possible, you can hard code the types and probably leave num out, and use dynamic only when necessary. Now, some people will say that we should use var and let our operating system, let the compiler infer the type for us, but personally I prefer to hard code. I think it's more clear what the code's doing. We have a better idea of what we're working with. So I think this is the best way to do it. Other people prefer doing it this way. It's really up to you, but just avoid dynamic. Use it only when you actually need to. So now that we know the different types, you might be thinking what we can do with these variables. So the first thing we can do is print them out. So I can use my print statements and I can print any variable regardless of type. I can just say int num, close parentheses, save my file. And if I just hit up, so from my terminal, if I press the up button, it's going to give me the previous command, which was clear. I'm going to have to write this one again. Dart hello underscore world dot dart, enter, hello world, and notice underneath it's giving me 1. So the first print statement is this one, our second print statement is this one. Then under it, so that was the int, I can write double num, no worries. I can write the string, first name, all of this will work. Save the file, up, this time it worked, enter. So hello world 1, 1.2 of it all works fine. Notice I don't need any quotes around it. However, if I want to add a string in addition to this, I will need quotes around it. So let me just comment these out, and I'll also comment this out. And by the way, you can change the comments with control and the slash. Control slash will put the double slash in front or remove those double slashes to make or get rid of the comments. Okay, so I can write print hello, and if I use the $, following this I can use a variable. So notice that when I write first name here, it's in a different color to show me it is the variable first name, not a string. And of course I need my semicolon, then back to my terminal, up, and notice now it says hello Ovid. It's taking the string from here and putting it right here. I can also use this with any other type. So now it's going to say hello 1. I could do it with a double as well, and so on. So this is called string interpolation. That's what allows us to put any variable inside of a string so that we can print it out or do something else with it. You might be wondering, okay, Ovid, but what if I want to put a price there? What if I want to say this costs $29? How am I going to write, the $? Well, to do that, we can escape. By using that backward slash, whatever comes afterwards is registered as a string rather than any special character. So notice that now int num is the same color as the rest of the string, because now int num is just a regular string. It's not the variable. And now this $sign is also just a regular string. So if I save the file and run it, notice it says hello, comma, $sign int num. And of course, this is useful if I want to write like a price or something like this. Now it's going to show it like an actual price, as opposed to if I get rid of this, well, it's going to give me an error because I don't have a variable called 1, and then you can see the rest is recognized as a string. It gets a bit confused, doesn't it? One other very useful thing to know about string interpolation is that if we put the curly brackets around like this, we can then write an expression rather than just a variable. So I can say int num plus 2. And notice it's all in blue because none of that is an actual string. What it's going to do is first figure out the value here and then plug that value into my string. So if I do it now, it will say hello 3 because of course int num was 1. We're adding 2, that makes 3. Nice and simple. This is extremely useful, especially for if I have a function which runs on an object or something like that. I don't right now, but just for example, I could say int num to string. If I get rid of the curly brace, what it's going to do is think int num is the number and then to string is just a string. So running like that, it will say 1.toString. But on the other hand, if I have this curly brace, it's going to actually run that function. Now for this specific one, it doesn't make any sense because toString returns the number as a string. So it will literally just give me back, if I save it, it will just give me back hello 1. So this function doesn't do anything, but it's what you would use to run a function within our string right here, just to make things a bit more organized. So the last thing I'm going to do before giving you guys the exercise for today is arithmetic. I'm going to show you guys how to do arithmetic. We can do all the regular arithmetic operations, add, subtract, divide, and multiply with any number type variables. So I could print int num plus 5, that's fine. I can print double num minus 123. I could print num divided by 12. This is all good. And finally, I could print int num times 120. And all of this will work. And it gives us exactly what we would expect. 6 minus, you can read the rest. Okay, so arithmetic works exactly like you'd expect. There's only 2 tricky ones you need to be aware of. The first is used in programming very often, but you might not have used it in math class, and that's this percent sign. And this is pronounced modulo. What modulo does in programming is it gives us the remainder after a division. And I'll just put the comment in front of this so you guys can read it. It's going to give us the remainder after a division. And again, you might not have used this in math class, but you'll see it a lot in programming. So 12, if I say print 12 modulo 5, it's going to give us just that 2 at the end. You'll see. And let me just get rid of these to make things easier to see. It's going to give us just the 2. If I do this modulo 11 instead, you're going to see it's going to give me the 1. If I do it modulo 12, it's going to give me the 0. And this modulo will be extremely useful for, if you have a big list and you want to divide it into smaller parts, you need to do different things for different things. That modulo is going to save your life a lot. Okay, and the final operation, which you might not have used before. It's not in every programming language, or if it is, it goes by a different name or a different symbol, is this. This is our floor divide, or our integer divide. What this does is it keeps the result of our division as an int rather than changing it into a double. So if I print 10 divided by 7, let's see the result of this first. I'm just going to comment this out. We can see it gives us a 1.42 and so on. So this is clearly a double. But on the other hand, if I use the floor divide or the integer divide, save it and run this again, it's going to give me just that whole number. It's going to forget about everything afterwards and just give me that whole number. This is going to be really useful again when working with different types, because if you're working with ints and doubles at the same time, it can sometimes give you an error if you don't mean to change the type, but it does it for you anyway. On the other hand, floor divide will keep your int as an int, so it can definitely help avoid errors in that way. Okay guys, so we have learned a lot in this lesson, like really we went over a lot, and we're gonna put this all together in a quick exercise I have for you guys. So I'm going to make a new file and we'll give it a name afterwards. And this is where I'll explain what we're doing. And in our next video, I'll give you the solution to this. So what we're going to do is make a simple program that prints out how many hours, minutes, and seconds are in a number of seconds. So we can hard code the seconds. So we can say something like int seconds equals 120. And we're gonna take that and make it print out something like 2 minutes, 0 seconds. Okay? So I'll give you guys a couple clues. You'll definitely need to use modulo. You'll definitely need to use print. You'll need to use string interpolation, and you'll probably need one or more, I think more, variables. Okay guys, so if you can do this, try this on your own first, and in the next video we're going to go over the solution. So I'm looking forward to that. Okay everybody, so thank you very much for joining me today, and I will see you guys next time. And that's been it from me, so Ovidius out.